So to sort through some of the criminal questions that are still lingering in the wake of Saturday night's not guilty verdict, Adam Thompson joins us from New York City. He's a criminal defense and civil law attorney practicing for over 25 years. Adam, thanks for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Brian.
So the thing I'm hearing the most is that the Zimmerman was overcharged, and not like me at a restaurant, but overcharged. So explain, do you agree or disagree, and then discuss?
I absolutely think he was overcharged. When this case first broke, it had at the best manslaughter charges on it. But the prosecution charged for murder in the second degree. Murder in the second degree required that the prosecution prove that George Zimmerman acted with a depraved mind or ill will or some degree of hatred towards Trayvon Martin. That just didn't exist. There were no facts or evidence to support that. But I think the prosecution charged at that level, one, to appease political and public outcry, but also knowing that down the line, by charging murder in the second degree, manslaughter is a required lesser included under the law. So they would get two bites at the apple at some point, murder second degree and manslaughter. And their hope was that when the case went to the jury, that the jury might, hearing such weak evidence, say, let's reach a compromise verdict, make everyone a little happy, everyone a little sad. So we'll find him not guilty of the top count, and we'll compromise and find him guilty of manslaughter. But fortunately, given the evidence that was presented, which was clearly favorable to the defense and a complete debacle for the prosecution, justice did prevail in this case. It's sad a 17-year-old was killed. Everyone feels for the Martin family, but on evidence alone, on law, on what has to happen in this kind of case, the jury made the right decision and found him not guilty on all counts.
And basically, had it gone down differently, if Zimmerman had verbally confronted Trayvon Martin and then his gun fell out of his belt and discharged and the bullet killed Trayvon Martin, that would be manslaughter, right?
That would be an accidental homicide, and the argument would be that George Zimmerman acted in a negligent manner, that he didn't properly use or holster or protect his firearm. He allowed it to discharge accidentally and kill another person. So, yeah, that would have been a form of manslaughter.
And if you can articulate to a reasonable standard that you feel your life is threatened, every American has the right to defend themselves with whatever means at hand, correct?
Absolutely. Self-defense is one of our most protected rights as a citizen. If you are presented by another individual, and the key thing here is who is the initial aggressor, the person that starts the confrontation, the person that throws the first punch, then you have a right to meet that force with equal force. That's the foundation of self-defense. In this case, the argument clearly was George Zimmerman, in his mind, and remember, it's his mind subjectively at the time, did he believe that deadly force was being used against him by Trayvon Martin, by being struck in the face, his nose being broken, his eyes being blackened, he falls to the ground, he's dazed, confused, he now has blood pouring from his nose down his throat, affecting his breathing, his head's hit against the concrete a couple of times. I think it's reasonable that most people in that circumstance would think their life is in danger. And as a result, it allowed him to then use equal force, which would be deadly force. So he takes out his firearm, he shoots Trayvon Martin. That's self-defense.
And I guess just the one thing that I've been mystified by for the people on the convict Zimmerman side is if someone is beating my head on a sidewalk, and then they also, just in case there's some gray area about what they intend for me physically, in case there's some gray area, then they add, "You're going to die tonight." Then at that point, I'm not waiting around for any more evidence that this is an attempt on my life. And do you think hearing that the jury is of 6 women? What do you think swayed them the most? Was it looking at Zimmerman? What do you think was the tipping point, if there was one?
The tipping point just has to be the complete meltdown of the presentation by the prosecution. Remember, there are 2 main witnesses, the investigating officers who went to the scene, Singleton and Serrano, both said after doing extensive investigations into the case, interviewing George Zimmerman 4 or 5 times. And remember, there's a videotape, there's a walkthrough, there's audio tapes, there's written statements, there's even a Hannity interview from months later. And they basically testified under oath. We thought the stories were consistent. If there were inconsistencies, they were minor. And overall, when asked, do you believe him, they said, we found him credible and believed his version. When your two main witnesses say that, I mean, think about it, Brian. When was the last time you heard in a major homicide case the two main police officers saying we believe the defendant? Never, right? Never. And
No.
on expert witnesses who, and again, the main expert they put on was Dr. Bao, and what did he say? I don't remember a single thing I did in the autopsy, have no independent recollection of it. He even had the audacity to hold up his fingers, do a goose egg sign, and then he goes on to produce records that he's reading in court that he claims are his personal notes that he never turned over to anybody, and he just decided on hap chance to change his opinion on 2 or 3 major points without telling anyone. I mean, you can't get more of a debacle than that.
And Adam Thompson is our guest on American Now with Andy Dean. Brian Suits filling in. And also, there is sort of the missing unwitnessed part, and it really boils down to where you come down on this case. Did George Zimmerman begin the confrontation or not? And no one eyeballed that. The one living witness says he did not, that he was attacked. So what could the prosecution have done besides saying that his jacket wasn't dirty enough? Why is it? I guess what I'm asking is why do people still believe that George Zimmerman began the fight?
Well, because depending on what side of the case you fall on, you will interpret different facts to meet your required end result. That's just really how it works. If you believe Zimmerman, you're going to tailor the facts to go towards a self-defense charge and acquittal. If you favor the Trayvon Martin version of the facts, you're going to think that he was a minority that was stalked by an overzealous wannabe cop who then took his life for no reason. And you can make facts apply to both. It's just who presented them better at trial, who presented them with less loose ends and less inconsistencies, and who overall did the best cross-examination and presentation of the witnesses. And in this case, it was the defense. So, if you look at the evidence, if you take the facts that were presented, no one will know who threw the first punch because the only evidence out there are those statements that were shown to the jury that Zimmerman gave that were recorded. Other than that, you never heard from an eyewitness who said one way or the other, this is what happened. The only eyewitness we really know that really saw something happen at the time of real substance was John Good, who looked out his window and saw who he believed to be Trayvon Martin on top of Zimmerman. So now that corroborates that he was on top of him in a ground and pound position like MMA style, hitting him. So that's consistent with Zimmerman. And he believed he heard cries of help from the person on the bottom, who was Zimmerman. So if you take that one witness, he probably painted the closest to the scene that we could of anyone else. So just if you believed him and nothing else in the case, that's reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt means a not guilty verdict, and you get an acquittal.
And last question, to the best of your knowledge, is there any municipality in America that allows someone who's being followed to attack the follower because they think there's a threat?
Well, I mean, everything is the reasonableness of the perception by the person. I mean, look, a strong argument could be made. If I was handling this case for Trayvon Martin, I would say, here's a young man who lived in the community with his family. These are good people. He's a college-bound student. He did nothing wrong but go to the store to buy some Skittles and drinks and bring home to his family. And on the way back, some crazy guy is following him relentlessly from spot to spot. He's trying to get away from him and avoid him. And next thing you know, this guy's standing on top of him. Now, just as George Zimmerman knew that there was crime in the area, maybe Trayvon Martin knew about that crime in the area too. And all the people that were committing break-ins and burglaries and robberies, maybe he thought this was a person who was part of the people committing those crimes. So when this guy is following him in a car, then jumps out of the car and approaches him, and for all we know, the gun might have already been out, already been cocked, ready to go. I see a guy following me in the dark at night. I'm by myself. There's crime in the area, and he has a gun. I'm going to defend myself. Do you wait until he shoots you or attacks you? No, you strike first. That's how the prosecution should have presented this case.
All right, Adam Thompson, New York-based criminal defense attorney, joins us. Thanks so much for talking to us today, Adam.
Thanks for having me on, Brian.
All right, we'll be back in just a minute. It's America Now. Andy Dean is on vacation this week. Brian Suits filling in at 877-927-ANDY, 877-927-ANDY. Your phone calls about the verdict and more right after this.